Alright, for you behind the scenes nerds, I know you're out there, I'm one of them. I completely rearranged the studio. We'll see if it's any better than it was before. Welcome to A Class of Angels, the series where we take a look at advanced writing techniques through the lens of a silly vampire show from the early aughts. My name is Michael Aguero, and today we're going to be looking at Season 1, Episode 4, I Fall to Pieces. Alright folks, it was bound to happen eventually. We got to an episode where there's really nothing to talk about. Where we get to an episode where there is no big theme to cover. In the first episode, we look at what a pilot does. In the second episode, we looked at how a show can establish tone. But now that we are 4 episodes in, this show is firmly beyond that territory of it's a pilot, it's a spin-off, and now has to stand on its own. So if we're looking at a standard monster of the week, what can we learn from that? Maybe we can learn something by analyzing the structure of this episode. Well, unfortunately, that is also pretty standard. It is a boilerplate 3-act structure. We get an episode where Angel has to learn to accept money from the people he is saving, both because the agency needs it, and as Doyle explains in the episode, it is better for the victim so that they do not get too attached to Angel. And it's about our victim learning to sort of stand up for herself. There's a sort of empowerment message there. I do think there's one interesting bit in the structure here where, because we are focused on that victim empowerment, we know who our bad guy is right away. The episode isn't trying to figure out who the monster is like it was in the second episode. It's entirely focused on how the bad guy is doing his bad guy thing, his supernatural ability, and how they stop it. But other than that, the episode is pretty plain, so what can we learn from it? Well, last episode, we looked at how the writers took the empty space in between the sort of bricks of plot to slot in information about our series myth arc, about the overarching themes we're going to be talking about through the entire series. This episode does a similar thing in using those little sort of dead spaces to add information about character and to remind us about some of the subplots that are going on in this season, and that's what we're going to be looking at today. One of the smaller things they make sure to remind us of is Kate. You will remember Kate Lockley from the second episode. She is the detective character in this series and is both a romantic interest and a potential foil for Angel. We get her back in there. She doesn't need to be in this episode. You can even bring the cop scene that happens later into this episode without her. But they bring her back to remind us of the audience, both that she exists and the romantic tension between her and Angel. That's why we get that little line about, "Are you here to ask me on a date?"
So judging by your uncomfortableness, I would say you're either about to ask me out on a date or you need a favor.
You'll remember she wasn't in the last episode at all, and because we are only 4 episodes into this series, they've got to bring that stuff back in. They also use her wisely to drop in a little reference to Wolfram and Hart. You will remember from the first episode that Wolfram and Hart is our actual big bad for the series. They haven't been mentioned in 2 episodes, so it's good to get a little reference to them back in there, and it helps us to remind the audience what separates this from the parent season and the type of bad guys Angel will be going after. It is no coincidence that the bad guy in this episode isn't just someone with supernatural abilities. He's a doctor and a pillar of the medical community. He is someone they make sure to state in the episode, both for supernatural reasons and practical reasons, he probably isn't going to go down for this. The bulk of the character stuff that happens in this episode is between Cordelia and Doyle. Cordelia and Doyle are our two sidekick characters. They help Angel in his sort of crime fighting, but we typically have not focused on them up till now outside of the pilot and little character moments along the way. Like last episode, our first scene is between these two characters. It is primarily there to set up the plot and tension of the episode, that being that Angel needs to accept money for helping people, but at the same time, we use that to build their character. You'll notice that Cordelia says that she would like some things, and Doyle makes the little comment about how she has everything she needs. This is a flirtation comment, as he is obviously talking about her physical appearance.
What am I missing?
Not a thing I can see.
He makes another wisecrack in a few seconds about how she could use less clothing.
Personally, I don't think you need much in the way of clothes.
You'll notice that Doyle is sitting there fiddling with cards. This is something his character does a lot. He did it in the pilot. He does it in a few other episodes. And we get that spot at the end of this scene after his vision where he asks for scotch. All of this is to kind of set up Doyle's reputation as being a little bit of a lowlife or a sleaze, which is all going to be part of his arc later on and is one of the driving aspects of the tension between him and Cordelia romantically. Doyle is very interested in Cordelia, wants to date Cordelia, but she really doesn't want to have anything to do with him. She sees him as a bit of a loser. One of the other things I wanted to mention in this episode, even though it is a bit of a digression, is a scene between Cordelia and Doyle where she calls him a name that nowadays is considered politically incorrect. It is considered not an okay thing to say, that being when she calls him a retard.
You're a lot smarter than you look. Of course, you look like a retard.
One of the reasons I wanted to bring this up is not to defend the show for using it or to say that we need to think about the show in the context of the era it came out. I always found those to be kind of a lame defense and not really something I cared about. The reason I wanted to mention it in this episode is because of how the writers use it over the course of a series in a way that, while incredibly risky, is really interesting to me. So earlier in the series, there is one or two instances, they might both be by Cordelia, where a so-called good guy calls another character a retard. But later in the series, as the sort of public perception of that word turned and it became a less okay thing to say, we only see bad guy characters use it. We see characters like Spike in the 5th season who don't care about anybody else's opinion or emotions use it rather than our good guys. This is not something I would recommend you do. It is a minefield and a half. But it is interesting to note that in this era, as the public perception of the word shifted, the writers kind of shifted with it, and while still using it, used it to the effect of further setting up their bad guy characters. We get a little more Cordelia character building stuff. She mentions a couple times in this episode how unlucky it is that our victim, Melissa, got to date a doctor, but the doctor turned out to be a creep. This is to remind us that Cordelia is someone who cares about class and status and appearance. She thinks that, a guy who is a doctor is wonderful to date solely because they are a doctor. We get Doyle slipping some whiskey into the victim's coffee cup after she is attacked to help her relax. You will notice this comes out of a flask. Again, this is sort of to help remind us the kind of character Doyle is. And then we get a scene right before the monster attacks at the end of the episode between Cordelia and Doyle, where they are talking about dating and how troublesome dating is and stuff like that. Again, you see that tension where Doyle is interested in dating Cordelia, likes Cordelia, but Cordelia doesn't want anything to do with him in that capacity. So now that we've looked at some of the examples of how it's done in the episode, why is it important? Why is it important to use those little spaces in between to remind our audience about the bigger picture that's going on and set up these sort of small character moments and subplots along the way? It's not only important to remind our audience about larger characters like Kate Lockley or plot elements like Wolfram and Hart being the big bad that is somehow tied to everything. It's really important for that character stuff, as we see with Doyle and Cordelia. Well, we talk a lot in writing about foreshadowing, about setting up our plots so that they pay off, so that when the bad guy is defeated, it doesn't look like a Deus Ex Machina or it is earned, but we rarely talk about the same when it comes to our characters or subplots. Fans of the show will know that Doyle is not going to be around for a while. We only have a few episodes with him. So in those episodes, we both have to set up his character so that his arc of redemption makes sense when we get there, and his romantic subplot with Cordelia so that it pays off at the end and doesn't feel like it came out of nowhere. But Doyle is a sidekick. He's a side character. We don't get a lot of focus on him. So we can't use our big plot scenes to focus on his character. We've got to use those little spaces in between to always make sure that we are reminding the audience of it, walking the audience along this journey with us, so that when we hit those big payoffs at the end, those punches land. This is something that is vital for us as writers to remember and master. The first episode of the first scene of this episode could have been just a standard setting up the plot sequence with Cordelia and Angel and him needing to accept taking money from the victims that they are saving. Instead, the writers use some of that extra space, put in just a few lines to remind us some of the undercurrents of this season. So that's it. That's the episode. There really wasn't a whole lot to go over here. Hopefully we will have something a bit meatier to dive into in the next episode. If you liked this video and want to support it, please tell a friend. That will help the channel grow. You can also support us directly on Patreon so we can continue to buy better equipment and supplies. You can follow me on Twitter if you want to keep track of what is happening with the channel, and you can support us by buying my short stories on Google Play. They are now also on the Amazon Kindle storefront. I uploaded a short story there the other day called Already Dead. It is about a man who wakes up buried alive in his own coffin. He climbs his way out craving meat. Everything may not be what it seems. As it turns out, he is not the monster on the loose. My name is Michael Aguero. This has been a Class of Angels. I will see you in the next video. My neighbor's dog is barking. I don't know if you can hear that, but I can super hear that. One of the first things they do with those cracks... Well, hello, kitty. Come here, kitty, kitty. Meow, come here. Look at this giant cat. Maybe if the internet doesn't care about writing, it'll care about cats.